The kitchen product. No one questions. Most people think parchment paper is one of the safest items in the kitchen. You line a baking tray, wrap food, slide it into the oven, and never question it for a second. After all, it's just paper. It doesn't smell toxic, it doesn't look dangerous, and it has been normalized as a clean, harmless cooking tool for decades. But that assumption is exactly where the risk begins. Because not all parchment paper is made the same way, and some of the most commonly used white parchment papers on the market may expose food to chemicals that were never meant to be heated, much less consumed. The problem starts with how white parchment paper is manufactured. To achieve that bright, uniform appearance people associate with cleanliness, many brands rely on heavy chemical bleaching, chlorine-based treatments, and synthetic surface coatings. These processes strip away the paper's natural color and stability in exchange for aesthetics. When parchment paper is exposed to high heat, those chemicals do not simply disappear. They can break down and migrate directly into food. That matters because parchment paper is rarely used at low temperatures. It is used for baking, roasting, air frying, and grilling. Mature environments where temperatures routinely exceed 400 degrees. Even more concerning, many brands advertise their parchment paper as non-stick without clearly explaining what creates that non-stick surface. In many cases, it comes from coatings that degrade under heat, releasing residues slowly and repeatedly over time. This is not about immediate toxicity. It's about long-term exposure that no one tracks, no one measures, and no one warns consumers about. This video is not meant to create fear. It's meant to create awareness. Once you understand which parchment paper brands to avoid, and why white parchment paper is the biggest red flag in the kitchen, you will never look at this everyday product the same way again. What seems harmless on the surface becomes far more complicated once you understand what actually happens in the oven. Number 7. Reynolds Kitchens Parchment Paper. Reynolds Kitchens Parchment Paper is one of the most widely used baking papers in North America, and that popularity is exactly what makes it concerning. When a product becomes this common, people stop questioning it. It becomes background noise in the kitchen, trusted by default rather than examined by design. The most obvious red flag is its bright white appearance. That color does not occur naturally. It is the result of intensive chemical bleaching processes designed to create a clean, uniform look that consumers associate with safety. While the brand states that the paper is food safe, what is rarely discussed is how chemically bleached paper behaves under prolonged high heat. Parchment paper is almost always used in ovens and air fryers, where temperatures regularly exceed 400 degrees. Under those conditions, chemically treated paper can begin to degrade, increasing the likelihood of chemical migration into food. This is not about an immediate reaction. It's about repeated exposure over months and years, especially for people who bake frequently or cook at home daily. Another concern is the non-stick coating. Reynolds relies on silicone to prevent sticking, but provides limited transparency about the grade of silicone used or how it performs after repeated heating cycles. While silicone is often considered safe, lower-grade formulations can degrade faster, particularly when paired with chemically processed paper fibers. That combination raises legitimate questions about what ends up on food during long or repeated cooking sessions. There is also an environmental misconception. Many people assume parchment paper is compostable, but heavily bleached paper with synthetic coatings often is not accepted by composting facilities. The real issue with Reynolds Kitchens parchment paper is not that it causes immediate harm. It's that it normalizes a product that prioritizes appearance and convenience over material transparency. When safer unbleached alternatives exist, continuing to use heavily processed white parchment paper becomes a habit-based choice rather than an informed one. Number 6. If you care white parchment paper. If you care white parchment paper presents a unique problem because it is marketed as a safer, more responsible alternative. The branding emphasizes environmental awareness, health consciousness, and sustainability, which immediately lowers consumer skepticism. When people believe a product is ethical and clean, they stop examining the details. That trust becomes the risk. Despite its cleaner image, the core issue remains the same as with more commercial brands. The white version of this parchment paper is still chemically processed to achieve its bright, uniform color. Even when chlorine-free bleaching methods are used, chemical treatment is still involved. Bleaching alters the paper's natural fiber structure, reducing its inherent heat resistance and stability. That matters because parchment paper is almost never used gently. It is exposed to sustained high temperatures during baking and roasting, often repeatedly. Under these conditions, chemically altered fibers can weaken, darken unevenly, or become brittle, all signs of material breakdown. Many users notice these changes during longer baking sessions, which is not a cosmetic issue but a functional warning. When parchment paper degrades while in direct contact with food, the potential for residue transfer increases. The non-stick coating adds another layer of concern. While the brand promotes responsibility, it does not clearly disclose the grade or sourcing of the silicone used to create that non-stick surface. Without transparency, consumers are trusting a label rather than evidence. Over time, repeated heating can reduce coating integrity, especially when combined with bleached paper fibers. The most ironic issue is frequency of use. Because this brand is perceived as safer, people use it more often and without hesitation. Repeated exposure matters more than isolated use. A product does not need to be overtly toxic to be problematic. It only needs to be used consistently while carrying hidden compromises. When it comes to parchment paper, white should never be the default choice, regardless of how responsible the branding appears. Number 5. Kirkland's Signature White Parchment Paper. Kirkland's Signature White Parchment Paper is trusted by millions, largely because it carries the Costco name. That trust, however, often replaces scrutiny. When a product is sold in bulk under a respected private label, people assume it has already been vetted. The most immediate red flag with this parchment paper is its bright white appearance, which signals intensive chemical processing rather than natural paper quality. That uniform color is achieved through bleaching treatments that alter the paper's fiber structure. While the brand assures customers the product is food safe, it provides very little transparency about how the paper performs under prolonged high heat. Parchment paper is commonly used for roasting vegetables, baking bread, and lining pans at temperatures that exceed 425 degrees. Under these conditions, chemically processed paper can begin to weaken, curl, or darken unevenly, all signs of material breakdown. Another concern is the silicone coating used to create the non-stick surface. Silicone itself is not inherently dangerous, but its safety depends heavily on quality and heat stability. Kirkland does not disclose the grade of silicone used or how it holds up after repeated heating cycles. Over time, lower-grade coatings can degrade, especially when exposed to fatty or acidic foods that accelerate breakdown. Bulk packaging introduces another problem. Because this parchment paper is sold in large rolls, people tend to use it more frequently and more casually. It becomes a default kitchen tool rather than an occasional convenience. That repeated exposure matters. Even minimal chemical migration, when multiplied across hundreds of meals, becomes a long-term concern rather than a one-time risk. There is also a widespread misconception that this parchment paper is compostable. Chemically treated white paper with synthetic coatings often does not break down properly in compost systems. The issue with Kirkland's Signature Parchment Paper is not immediate danger. It is the quiet normalization of a heavily processed product used repeatedly at extreme temperatures. Number 4. Glad White Parchment Paper. Glad White Parchment Paper benefits heavily from brand familiarity rather than material excellence. Glad is a name people instinctively trust, built through decades of household use in trash bags and food storage, and that trust often carries over without question into baking products. The most immediate warning sign is the paper's stark white appearance, which indicates heavy chemical bleaching designed to meet visual expectations rather than preserve natural paper integrity. That bleaching process alters the fiber structure, making the paper less stable under sustained high heat. Many users notice that Glad parchment paper browns quickly at the edges, curls, or becomes brittle during longer baking sessions. These are not cosmetic flaws. They are signs of structural stress and material breakdown occurring while the paper is in direct contact with food. The non-stick coating introduces additional concerns. Glad relies on a silicone-based coating to prevent sticking, but offers minimal disclosure about the grade, sourcing, or long-term heat durability of that coating. When silicone coatings degrade, especially when paired with chemically processed paper, they can lose stability and effectiveness. This may result in uneven cooking, food sticking unexpectedly, or residue remaining on baked goods. Another issue is how this parchment paper is marketed for broad use across ovens, grills, and high heat applications, without clearly emphasizing temperature limitations. Consumers often push it beyond safe thresholds, assuming brand reliability will compensate. In reality, heavily processed white parchment paper is less forgiving under extreme conditions than unbleached alternatives. Familiarity creates a false sense of security. Over time, repeated exposure to degrading paper fibers and coatings becomes a silent issue rather than an obvious one. The core problem with Glad white parchment paper is not immediate danger, but the normalization of a chemically processed product used repeatedly at extreme temperatures without transparency. Number 3. Hearth and Hand White Parchment Paper. Hearth and Hand White Parchment Paper appears harmless largely because it is positioned as simple, affordable, and aesthetically pleasing. Sold through a mainstream retailer and styled as a clean, minimalist kitchen essential, it blends seamlessly into everyday cooking habits. That familiarity lowers scrutiny. The primary concern with this parchment paper lies in the materials used to achieve its non-stick performance. Reports and consumer testing have raised questions about the use of synthetic coatings and chemical additives designed to create a slick surface under heat. In some cases, these coatings may include compounds related to PFAS, often referred to as forever chemicals, because they do not break down easily and can accumulate in the body over time. Long-term exposure to these substances has been linked in studies to hormonal disruption and thyroid interference. Another issue is the physical quality of the paper itself. Many users report that it is thinner and less durable than higher quality alternatives. Thin parchment tears more easily, especially when exposed to moisture or when lifting food from a hot tray. When tearing occurs, food can come into direct contact with the pan, defeating the purpose of using parchment paper in the first place. This often leads to increased oil usage to prevent sticking, undermining the health benefits people expect. There are also reports of unusual odors during baking, which can indicate coating breakdown under heat. Even when no smell is noticeable, degradation may still be occurring. The concern here is not a single use, it is repeated exposure. When a product with hidden compromises is used frequently at high temperatures, small risks compound. Hearth and Hand white parchment paper exemplifies how attractive branding and accessibility can mask material shortcomings that matter in real cooking conditions. Number 2. Chef's Planet white parchment paper. Chef's Planet white parchment paper is often perceived as a premium option because of its branding and positioning, but performance under real kitchen conditions tells a different story. The most significant concern with this product lies in the heavy chemical coating used to achieve non-stick functionality. While the packaging suggests durability and quality, repeated exposure to high heat reveals weaknesses that matter. Parchment paper is commonly used at temperatures above 400 degrees, and under those conditions, coatings that are not designed for repeated thermal stress can begin to break down. Many users report that Chef's Planet parchment paper becomes brittle, discolored, or scorched more quickly than expected, which is a clear indication of material degradation. When that degradation occurs while food is in direct contact with the paper, the likelihood of residue transfer increases, particularly with fatty foods that accelerate breakdown. Another issue is durability. This parchment paper tends to tear easily when lifting baked goods or removing trays from the oven. Tearing defeats the purpose of parchment paper and often forces users to rely on additional oils or sprays, increasing unnecessary fat intake. There are also reports of uneven non-stick performance, where food releases in some areas but adheres in others, suggesting coating inconsistency. Premium branding cannot compensate for instability under heat. The concern is not a single baking session. It is the repeated use of a chemically coated product in high-temperature environments over time. Chef's Planet white parchment paper highlights a recurring pattern in kitchen products. Marketing suggests quality, but material transparency and long-term performance are missing. For something that sits directly beneath food at extreme temperatures, those omissions matter. Number 1. Dixie white parchment paper. Dixie white parchment paper represents the clearest example of why this category deserves scrutiny. It is widely available, inexpensive, and familiar, which makes it easy to trust without examination. The most immediate warning sign is the bright white finish. That color is not natural to parchment paper. It is achieved through aggressive bleaching processes designed to create a clean, uniform appearance that consumers associate with safety. Those processes fundamentally alter the paper's fiber structure. When exposed to high heat, which is exactly how parchment paper is used, chemically treated fibers can weaken and degrade. Many users report that Dixie parchment paper darkens quickly, scorches at the edges, or produces smoke at normal baking temperatures. These are not minor inconveniences. They are indicators that the material is breaking down while in direct contact with food. The non-stick coating adds another layer of concern. Lower-cost parchment papers often rely on less durable silicone coatings that do not hold up well under repeated thermal stress. As the coating degrades, food may begin to stick, paper may tear, and residues can remain on baked goods. Durability is another consistent complaint. Thin parchment tears easily when lifting trays or handling heavier foods, increasing the chance of contact with heating elements or hot surfaces. That creates both safety and cooking issues. Environmental assumptions also play a role. Despite common belief, heavily bleached parchment paper with synthetic coatings is rarely compostable. The real issue with Dixie white parchment paper is not a single use. It is the repeated exposure to a chemically processed product used at extreme temperatures. Cheap, familiar, and widely trusted does not mean safe. Not all parchment paper is a problem. A few options stand apart because they follow clear, consistent principles. They are unbleached, meaning they avoid chemical whitening entirely. They use food-grade silicone coatings designed to remain stable under high heat. They maintain structural integrity without scorching, tearing, or releasing odors. Two examples that consistently meet these standards are PaperChef unbleached parchment paper and Cuisinart unbleached parchment paper. These products resist breakdown at normal baking temperatures, do not rely on aggressive chemical processing, and perform reliably across repeated use. Parchment paper sits directly beneath your food at some of the highest temperatures in your kitchen. Choosing an unbleached, high-quality option is one of the simplest upgrades you can make for both safety and performance. Once you understand the difference, there is no reason to keep using heavily processed white parchment paper out of habit. Awareness changes choices, and in this case, a small change can make a meaningful difference.